Hi there, it's Paulie here. With tea now, because my endocrinologist insists. They like the alcohol. So, Mr. Suits and I, yay, here to say greetings and to probably piss off some old school gamers. Because I'm just going to do a rundown on Battletech Classic. Now, Battletech is a game of essentially mecha, giant robots that are piloted by a pilot inside them who run around with giant cannons, guns, bombs, missiles, chainsaws, axes, whatever, and beat the living snot out of each other. This game came out in 1984. I have the original version, I just can't dig it out at the moment, but when I was playing it initially it was Battle Droids. However, Lucas tried suing them because he said droid was his own term, so they changed it to Battletech. Now, the original artwork and everything that they used with the game, they did not design their own mecha. They used ones from extant Japanese anime of the time. So their artwork came largely from Macross and also from things like Crusher Joe in particular. A few others thrown in there as well, but those were sort of their main sources. So, sidebar, yeah, long ago I had a best friend who worked hand in hand with Carl Masek. He was the guy that took Macross and hacked and butchered it into Robotech for American television. He's the guy who was so proud that he wrote Min-May's song. For those of you who have ever watched that series and thought you'd forgotten it, you might remember there was this bloody wretched girl who was always singing this song, Stage fright, this is my big night. Good, now you can't get it out of your heads and it will be a nightmare for the other half of your lives. Anyway, I loved Phaser, F-A-S-A, Phaser. I always called it Phaser, but they did great games. They always had a good graphic sense to them. They had a playability to them. I'm a huge fan of their Rebel Legion work. I think that's brilliant. Battletech has a huge following, and it's continued to be played over the decades, and there are new versions coming out now. Battletech Classic is still one of the core systems played. We'll go over that now, even though there are some new ones that have come out. I can't afford to buy all of those anyway. But in its essence, you are piloting one or more of these battle mechs, these giant battle robots, and you'll be beating the snot out of other battle robots. As the game developed, they developed other systems that could be on the board. There could be tanks and non-walking vehicles that might appear. Air power, artillery. It expanded to include infantry. It expanded to include essentially, what would you call it, powered armor. Proto-mechs, which are like essentially a powered armored suit, bigger than a man but not the same size as a mech. So they got quite a variety of slippage up and down the scales there. So it built in complexity as it went on. In some of the master rule sets, they were good enough to mark these with different numerical notes to show you that these were escalating levels of build and difficulty in the game, so that you wouldn't just be hit with all of this at once. Bless you, designers. It's a strange system in many ways. It was one of their first battle games, and as such, I find it a little bit clunky. I have to say, I think it's borderline unplayable these days. Everything's done on a 2d6 system. There is a mecha design system where you can essentially build a mech. You choose the type of mech. It can be light, medium, heavy, etc., etc. This gives you a set tonnage. You fill it with weapons of different types, with ammunition, with other systems, and this will be combined with whatever armor you've put onto it and the power plants that you've put in it, and you will end up cooking a thing through a very complex system which ends up with a mecha which will give you a set number of movement points, it will give you weapons, it will give you the heat generated by those weapons. It'll give you heat sinks to dissipate the heat used by those weapons, etc. Heat is important. It's a very strange mechanism that's pretty much unique to this system. This was their core thing to watch. Your mechas, they have armor, they have weapons, they have a pilot. When it is your turn to take a turn, you have a set number of movement points that your mech has. It costs you movement points to enter different sorts of terrain. There's a little chart which will show you. So going down a road or open terrain is pretty easy. You know, going uphill or wandering through a swamp or what have you is hard. There are rules for elevation, not only blocking line of sight, but also if you're like standing on a building and so on, and there's another building, there are shadows caused by elevation. You can hide behind a building from someone, etc., etc. Not too hard. There are water features. That is like a negative elevation level, because you step down into a river or step down, into a swamp or a lake. Very Monty Python-esque. I think we should tax all people who stand in water. This will run through your head many times as you play a game. Because here's the thing. You will move your mech, chompy, 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 and then you will fire your mech. Shooty, shooty, pew, pew. There are missiles, there are particle cannons, there are machine guns, there are autocannons, there are flamethrowers, etc. When you roll to hit, each weapon will have its own range band. You'll be rolling 2d6 to hit. You're going to have to pre-make like a little part on your sheet recording your mech for ease of play to show you what range bands different weapons will fall in. And this is where we come into that 1984 clunkiness, because you're rolling 2d6 and you're going to have to count up a lot of different modifiers to that dice roll. The wacky thing about this is that you're rolling 2d6 and you're hoping for high, so 12 is good or 2 is bad. The skill of the pilots is an important factor, and I kind of get why they were doing this, but bear with me, it's a little bit clunky. When you first read it, it will say your pilots are rated for their piloting skill, which is how skillful they are at driving these mofos, and the gunnery skill, how good they are at shooting other people's mofos. Okay. And they say, these particular guys, they generally have a 4 in one and 5 in another, and these ones have, different values. Under normal circumstances, you would think a larger number would be higher skill. But it's only as you go deeper into the system. No, the higher the skill number they've given you, the worse it is. Because what you're trying to do is roll over the pilot's skill level on 2d6 for something to succeed. So if he has a skill level of 6, that is way worse than having a skill level of 4. Right, got you. So it's like, in this day and age, I wouldn't have expressed that at all. I'd have given you a base target number, and I'd have said some guys have a skill of plus 1, 2, or 3, or whatever that you add to the roll. But, this is what they chose. So you have to take if you're shooting, you have to say take your pilot skill number, add in any extra numbers caused by the range, add in extra numbers caused by any other factors like smoke, etc. And that will give you a roll to hit. You can have quite a few weapons on these things, so you might be firing a few things at someone. You have huge cluster rocket sets where you fire them in batches. So you're firing like a batch of 3 or a batch of 5 long or short range rockets at someone because of that anime thing. You're going to have 101 contrails going towards someone. Now here's where it gets squirrely, because when you hit, it does damage. It crosses off armor. If an area no longer has any armor, then you roll for the location where you hit, by the way. So I roll to hit. Then I roll for the hit location for each shot. The weapon does damage. I cross that off the armor in the location. If there is no more armor left, then it goes into damaging that location. I cross off things from that location. If I've got an arm that's got a gun in it, but it's also got like actuators and so forth, it might also have ammunition stored in it. It could even have heat sinks in it. I cross these systems off. And if there's no more systems, then it goes kind of through into the next most logical section, so it can go through into a torso or what have you. All right. But I've rolled to hit, I've rolled location, and now I have to roll for each hit to see if that is a critical hit. So, all right, I'm rolling 2d6, trying to score high and see if these are critical hits. And if they are critical hits, I then go to a critical hit chart. And given the location that the critical hit has landed on, there is a different chart for each location to see what can happen to it then. If the cockpit has been hit, the pilot has to make a roll to see if he's knocked unconscious by the hit. If the cockpit is breached, the pilot might start taking damage if this is a place that doesn't have a Earth-like environment. The pilot can be injured when the cockpit area is breached. If he's injured, then he has to roll to see if he falls unconscious again. So a hit can lead to an awful lot of dice having to be rolled. Yeah, Mr. Snoots isn't happy. Let's say I've got like this mech that's got 2 big missile packs or whatever. Good, well I'm going to let fly with 50 missiles at this guy. Alright, well I'm firing them in batches of 5. Alright, so that's 10 rolls to hit. Alright, so I'm going to do 10 rolls to hit for each of those 10 rolls. I then, say I've got a poor accuracy, half of them land. So now I've got to do 10 rolls to hit. I've got to do 5 hit locations. I've also got to do 5 rolls to see if each of these are critical hits. If they are critical hits, and there might be 1 or 2, then I've got to roll critical hit charts for each of those. If any of these have done things like shake around the cockpit, then I have to roll for this guy. There's a lot of stages to damaging these things, hitting these things, figuring out what's done. It's quite a slow system. A modern design aesthetic would try and get rid of a lot of the charts and try and let the dice tell the tale. But this is a 1980s game. Charts are the thing. The more charts, the better, in fact. Weird aspect of the game, one that is... It's kind of it is the one great unique part of the game. It's also its most irritating, is when you fire weapons, when you move, when you do any of these things, your mech generates heat. You have heat sinks which disperse the heat, and you keep a little track of building up heat on the side of your little mech track. So as you do things, as you fire, as you move or whatever, it builds up heat. You subtract what your heat sinks are doing to try and basically chill this thing out. And if the heat reaches certain levels, you start rolling for other damage to happen to the mech. It can start shutting down, you start getting negatives to hit, you start getting negatives to piloting and gunnery rolls. At higher levels, your ammunition can start exploding. If it gets too hot, the pilot starts cooking, so if they start taking damage, they start rolling to see if they fall unconscious, etc. That's why you get mechs standing in water, because if they're standing in water, you double the efficiency, I think, of any immersed heat sinks, because they're like, causing great masses of steam around themselves. So for some reason, wading around in lakes, swamps and rivers is a tactical thing. You're trying to find ways of dumping your heat. Alrighty, so, a game with a lot of dice. Now, it's not too bad, I have to say. The game has survived because it was designed for you to be running 1 or 2 or maybe 3 mechs on a side. As they built other things in, as they brought in infantry and so forth, again, relatively simple mechanisms. The infantry represent a number of guys. As they take damage, you're crossing guys off. There's a little band on the side which says how much damage this unit of infantry can do depending on how many guys are left in it. You can special equip some of them, so there's special anti-armor squads or whatever, there are lots of rockets or whatever, but okay, it gives you some crunchies to step on. Artillery, obviously a great idea, you know, raining some shit down on people from afar. They brought out a thing called Mech, which I actually liked. It was enormously good fun. Mech uses it's got quite a simple vector movement system. So all it's doing, I shall demonstrate with an elephant. Show them your tummy. Yay! It's a hex movement to change your course from one hex facing to another will cost you thrust points depending on your speed. So in other words, if I'm heading up in this direction and I want to bend, you know, so now I'm traveling off 90 degrees, yeah, they're simulating the fact that I'm having to burn in the reverse direction, etc., and change my overall vector. It's not a bad way of doing it. It's a simple way of doing it. You're not making lots of plots and zigzagging things around. It gives you results. So it's not Star Wars where things magically zoom around like fighter planes in an atmosphere. You got to worry about Delta V. However, same idea. You're firing weapons at each other, which are doing damage depending on the location that they hit. And so, same in space. It just doesn't have the heat problems. I don't think they have heat. But Aeromech has been rolled over into Battletech in general. So now comprehensive Battletech rules for, you know, Battletech Classic will usually have the Aeromech design systems in there because, you know, it's quite fun streaking down out of the heavens and trying to machine gun a whole bunch of the infantry running around on the ground, or try and, you know, fling a couple of honking great missiles into these mechs. So, you know, now you've got a pretty comprehensive system of battle. They made a world for this. They decided they'd make kind of a technological dark age where there's been a mighty star empire which has founded a lot of these technologies, and then it has crumbled. So now there are people reusing old Imperial tech, explaining why so many people have the same mechs, because they were the ones that came in the game. And some of these ancient Imperial techs are way better than what these guys are making. So there's a limited store of higher tech, and they started making different clans and different nations, and it built quite a story of the machinations between these kingdoms and different mercenary groups and so on. Effectively, it gave you a ton of factions to play, and that has been sort of part of the fun of Battletech, getting into playing these factions and so forth. Where it gets difficult is following that bloody story, because this game has a long history. 1984. So, you know, this is a 40-year-old game we're talking about here. They kept updating it with new bits for that living universe. So they would do things set years later down the time stream, where there's new technology being developed. Here's a new type of weapons that are more efficient. Here's a new type of armor and drives that have just come in the new. Here's an enemy that had escaped, you know, from the original empire, gone Corwood, and has now come back. These guys have different technologies again. Here's all the rules for all their technologies, and then they would make things even further down the track. So there are many different time eras in which this game takes place, and of course sometimes the mechs are not 100% compatible within those times. The ones from a real kind of tech dark age period are going to suffer a bit from ones that have techs that simply give you a little bit more bounce for the ounce. So at its simplest, you don't have to worry about any of that. You take the game as written with its original charts. You say, we're just taking stuff in the original. That's what we're doing. If you've got the proper annotations and you read into the world a bit and you decide you like it, great. Well, you can decide, yes, you want to play during this period. Here's the extra weapons and here's the extra design elements that we can use for that period. So you don't have to be overwhelmed by it. I have to say it is overwhelming. There's so much of it. It's been a living game for so long. But you can narrow your focus and pick and choose. So look, is it a good game? Yeah, it is. Look, there's something weirdly attractive about stomping around the place in this big, ridiculous mech. It's also fantastic because these guys put so much time and love and effort into that wonderful wargaming bet that the future will have amazing, great big eyesore armoured vehicles that stand 60 feet tall and can be seen from dozens of kilometres away. And as we've found over the last few years, it's actually devolved into World War One with drones. That's the future of your combat right there. But anyway, stompy robots are good. You can plunge in there and design your mecha, which has its aficionados. I personally do love a game with a good design system because the mech and so on that are usually, or any of these things, the units provided in the game are usually crap. They haven't been designed by someone with the absolute sinister intellect of a vicious little 16-year-old with a penchant for rules lawyering. So it is worth meddling around with them. There's a host of models. So it is good fun. Again, take it at its simplest. You design some mechs, two sides, you run around with some good terrain, you shoot away at each other. Decide next time you're going to play, you're going to use a slightly different type of mech because, you decided that you had some different tactics in mind. I'm going to try the ones with flamethrowers that hit the other guy up. No, I'm going to try the ones that do melee and close in with a bit of axe as a hand, and I make pilot rolls through and bash him with this thing, etc. Death from above was one popular one. You could put jump jets on some mechs so that you can jump over terrain. Of course, people want to try jumping on the heads of other people, their mechs. Jumping up and down on infantry is never going to grow old. Jumping down onto a enemy mech, you can do lots of damage to the target's head area, and you also basically tend to bust up your own mech's legs. So, there's some pros and cons to doing that. A lot of these games, bigger is better, so when you get things like supposed scout mechs and so on, they're actually very vulnerable, and there's no real reason to have a small one. This was a bit of a thing with Phases thing. You get it in Interceptor from their Rebel Universe as well. There's no reason to take a light fighter, you take a heavy fighter. It's not like light fighters are more agile or go faster. It was simply a matter of how much engine power you're putting into a frame. Light or heavy didn't matter. So buy the heavy, and just if you want to go fast, you bung more engines in it. Same with this. There's such a host of material for this. There's tons of novels. There's tons of campaigns. There's tons of sort of tech readouts, which is booklets after booklets of mech designs. You can get all of this online, you can get all of this as PDF, so it's not that expensive to sort of get this material if you're keen on playing it again or playing it for the first time. Catalyst Games has taken over. They're bringing out new material. Now, part of that is they are doing streamlined gaming systems for Battletech. Part of that is from a desire to sell more models, where they've decided to do a game with a simpler combat system, much simpler, where you're going to be running more mechs on the table. So you're going to have way more of a combined arms feel to that. You're going to have air power, and you're going to have helicopters and infantry and powered armour, and you're going to have artillery strikes coming in, and yes, you're going to have all that thing happening. So I will go through that. There are many new systems that they're doing. I've got to get hold of that one and go through it for you. It was high time someone did that. But for a mano a mano kind of highly detailed mech dueling system, I think this system still rules supreme. Classic Battletech. It's still out there, it's still in print, it's still enjoyed after 41 years. Wow. But it gives a highly detailed game. You have to be patient with all those dice rolls. This isn't something where the turns are swift. But you can lovingly paint a handful of mechs. See, this is the thing I like. It's not that expensive a game to play. So you can lovely paint a handful of mechs, and that'll probably do you. And with the basic rule set and so on, you will be set for life. You'll be able to play this thing and enjoy. You can adapt pretty much any damn hex maps in the universe to play it on, or you can modify it for just an open tabletop if you wish. Battletech Classic. It is a classic. It has survived this long because it bloody well deserves to. It was a great concept. It came at a great time for that great concept. It did it right, and no one has ever really managed to do something that replaced it for mecha. It gives a good game, and if you find yourself really engaged by it, it's got a cracker of a universe to really dive into if you really want that extra engagement. It's full of stories, it's full of history. So, yeah, for many, many, many players, it is an obsession, and it deserves to be. It's great fun. It's got a role-playing game that spun off it, The Works. There's a new version of that role-playing game out. I played it a few times, and yeah, that works too. If you've never played Battletech before, worth having a look, particularly since PDFs are available pretty inexpensively, and you can just play this with counters and maps. No need for models at all. If you used to play Battletech, I started playing it again, and after about a 35-year break. And yeah, I had some fun with it. It was not just from the nostalgia value of, hey, yeah, I remember doing this and beating someone up at this convention back in 1987, but it was actually a good fun game. There is something just kind of eternally good fun about a giant robot stomping along the road, and your opponent suddenly screaming death from above as he tries to jump onto your head. It's a good game. So anyway, take a look at it, and do take a look at the other new stuff by Catalyst. Again, if the universe engages you and whatever, it's worthwhile looking at what they're doing. It's nice to see that the gauntlet has been picked up by a new company that is bringing out new material that's worthy of the old game. Anyway, Mr. Snoots and I just want to remind you, look after yourselves out there, particularly in places like the USA that have turned into something of a hellscape. Don't take strange puzzle cubes from the hands of strangers. Watch out for your personal safety, particularly if you're in the trans community. Take no shit from anything born. Never let anyone take your joy from you, and remember, the games community is here for you. It is your show.